I love the process. I embrace the process. I love being an author. I love being on book tour. It's fantastic. My book is in no means a complaint about it, but it's a gorgeous, complicated, high stakes profession where at every moment something could go wrong, and at every moment something could go fabulously right.
I am so excited to welcome our guest this evening. Hank Phillippi Ryan is the USA Today best-selling author of 16 psychological thrillers, winning the most prestigious awards in the genre, 5 Agathas, 5 Anthonys, and the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. She is also the on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV and has won an unprecedented 37 Emmy Awards, as well as a dozen more honors for her groundbreaking journalism and true crime stories. Her work has changed laws, changed lives, and resulted in millions of dollars in refunds and restitution for consumers. In her second career as a writer, national book critics call her a superb and gifted storyteller and a master of creating suspenseful mysteries. Please welcome back to Beyond the Page our friend Hank Phillippi Ryan.
This is so marvelous, Liz. Thank you. It is really fun to sit here and take in all your really kind words. Thank you. It's marvelous to see you all, and what a complete honor to be with you all here tonight. Thank you.
So you have such an amazing career and you are such a prolific writer on two different fronts. But I know people want to get to the books and get to the writing, but I want to take people back to a story that I think speaks volumes about your drive. Now, before you were a lauded investigative reporter and before you were a best-selling author, you had an experience common to many people. You got your first job, but you approached it in an uncommon way. Tell us that story and what in it has that mantra, the mantra that shaped your life.
Oh, so you're delving into my deep personal history right
The
off.
dark
I
secrets,
love
the
that. I love that. And
open it
I
up.
don't think you mean my very first job, which was at the Dairy Queen in Zionsville, Indiana. I can still make a pretty great dip cone with a curly Q on top if I ever need to do that. But when I got out of college, I decided that what I wanted to do was change the world, to make a difference, to have it matter that I had lived. So I decided, and just because it's us, I'll tell you, I decided to go into politics. So I worked for several political campaigns back home in Indiana. But sadly, not one candidate I ever worked for actually won. And that is a problem. That is, if you listen to the universe, as I do, and I bet you do too, if you listen to the universe was saying to me, find another career. So that's when I decided to be a journalist. And I thought I could change the world by being a reporter. So it was 1970. Important to remember, it was 1970, and I was 20. And I went into the biggest radio station in Indianapolis and I asked to talk to the news director. And I said, I'm here to apply for a job as a reporter. I want to be a radio reporter. So this news director, who kind of looked like Ed Asner, he was like Lou Grant a little bit, if you remember, he says, that's great. We do need a radio reporter. Where was your last radio reporting job? So I said, well, no, I've never been a radio reporter. He says, that's great. That's fine. Newspaper? No. Magazine? No. Television? No. And you can see where this job interview is going. I have never been a reporter. And he quickly just went through all the possibilities. Did you go to journalism school? Were you on the school paper? Did you ever take journalism? When you were a little girl, did you hand out neighborhood newspapers, door to door, anything? And I had nothing. And so finally, and I was pretty sure that this job interview was just tanking beyond anything we could imagine. But I deeply wanted this job. So finally, he says, you seem like a really nice young woman, and I bet I could teach you how to be a reporter, but I just don't have time. And he said, and besides, you're supremely unqualified for this job. There's no reason for you to have it. Can you give me one good reason why I should hire you? And I said, yes, I definitely can. I can give you one good reason why you should hire me. I said, your license is up for renewal at the Federal Communications Commission right now, and you don't have any women working here. And then I just smiled And the next day I had my first job in broadcasting. And I love that story. And thank you for asking me about it. It was such a life-changing moment in so many ways. One, Jane Pauley calls us the class of 1970, those women who started in broadcasting and actually in every realm of society in the 70s when the equal opportunity laws went into effect, and we took advantage of them and moved in to take our role in society. And I'm really proud to be part of that sort of breaking of the gender barrier in broadcasting. Leslie Stahl and Barbara Walters and Jessica Savage, Jane Pauley, we all got our jobs back then because we were women, but we couldn't keep them because we were women. And it was just the beginning of a time of working harder and being stronger and being confident and taking back our power. And I absolutely loved that. And you were talking about the mantra from that, and that's such a wise question, because I do think from that, and I think about it all the time, is that I was brave. I was brave that day. I took a chance and asked for a job that really I was, well, just ask the news director, supremely unqualified for. But I wanted it. I knew I could do a good job, and I went after it. And I took a chance that day. I was brave, and I found my calling. I found my calling. I've essentially been a reporter every day since that time, for 43 years. So it just proves that if we want something, we can go after it, and we should not be afraid, that we should have that confidence to go after what we want. I do not, let me just say quickly, I do not suggest threatening a potential employer with a federal lawsuit during your job interview. I just do not do this. Do not try this at home. But it worked for me.
Well, it sounds incredible. And there may be some letter writing campaign that comes out of this, because you mentioned the career in politics. That may give somebody an idea for your next incarnation. But let's jump to a question that's very relevant at this point from Robinson B., who's in the audience, who says, what made you had this fabulous investigative reporting career. What made you decide to start writing novels?
It's such a great question, and thank you for that. I grew up in really rural Indiana, so rural that you couldn't see another house from our house. And my sister and I used to ride our ponies to the library. And we would get books at the library and fill up the saddlebags with books and read up in the hayloft of the barn behind our house. And that is where I fell in love with storytelling. I read Nancy Drew. You all read Nancy Drew, right? The Clue in the Old Clock and the Clue in the Diary, which I thought was Clue in the Dairy for much of the book. And I'm thinking there should be cows. I don't know. I figured that out. I read every single Nancy Drew, then I read every single Sherlock Holmes short story and novella, and just fell in love with the architecture of a mystery, with the clues and the detective and the secrets and the deduction and the storytelling. And then I read Murder on the Orient Express. And this is the answer to your question, is at that one moment of reading Murder on the Orient Express, I thought, wow, how did she do that? How did Agatha Christie do that? How did she write such a brilliant story that surprises and delights us, but it was fair? And in the ending, you think, yeah, I could have figured that out. If only I were as smart as Agatha Christie. So in that moment, and I think I was about 13 or 14, in that moment, I thought, maybe when I grow up, I'll be a mystery writer. Maybe I should be a mystery writer. And in the next moment, I thought, no, maybe I should, instead of writing about detectives, maybe I should be a detective. Maybe instead of writing about Poirot and Miss Marple, I should be Poirot and Miss Marple. And it's so great that, I sort of have followed both dreams and had both dreams come true, at first as an investigative reporter, which is sort of a detective, and then as a crime fiction author. But very specifically, what made me start writing novels, what made me start, I was 55 when I started writing novels 20 years ago. And Liz, I just had a good idea. I was sitting at my desk at Channel 7, and I just had a good idea for a novel. And I came home and I said to my husband, sweetheart, I've got a great idea for a novel. I'm going to write a mystery. And Jonathan says, great, sweetheart. Do you know how to write a mystery? And I honestly said, how hard can it be? I've read a million of these books. Well, I was so wrong. I soon learned how definitely, desperately hard it could be. But that turned into Primetime, my first novel, which won the Agatha for Best First Novel. And that was the beginning of my crime fiction career. All because, all because I just, in that moment that we cannot calculate or predict, I just had a good idea. And you know that feeling of, you all know this, of having a good idea. And you just think, oh, this is going to work. And you try to poke it and prod it to see if you can deflate it, and it won't. And again, I was a little bit brave, right? It's the same theme that goes through because I mean, I had written a television story every day for years, and we can talk about that. But writing fiction was new, and writing fiction was a risk. But I was absolutely determined. I was obsessed. You couldn't get me away from this very computer. And I was determined to write that novel, and I did. And now I'm on book 16. Who'd have thought?
It's incredible. I think it's at a certain point, you're cranking out a book a year, right?
Yeah, cranking is an interesting word. Cranky a little bit might be. I mean, it's a lovely process. It's a wonderful process creating a story and writing a story and seeing how when you sort of start with just one little tiny gem of a germ of a good idea that's a possibility, and you sort of cultivate it just like a garden, and you're growing this idea into a beautiful story, and in the end it blooms into something that you don't really quite know what it's going to be, but there it is. And it's out of nothing but our own imagination, and I absolutely embrace that.
So, a question from the audience, Delcia W asks, how do you invent a character in the novels that you write?
Oh, what a good. I've never thought about it that way. I've never thought about inventing a character. I think the way it works, if I think about it, is a character is all about what they want and how far they'll go to get it. And what decisions will they make along the way? And how will that decision reveal to the reader what kind of person that is? Are they a lovely, benevolent, selfless, good person who makes the right decision for the greater good? Or are they sort of a venal, ugly, corrupt person who is trying to take everything for themselves? So, what I start with in the book is not so much a character, but a cool thing that might happen. And all this could be yours. What if an author was on book tour and realized that she was being stalked as a result of a Faustian bargain? How far would she go to protect herself and her family and her life and her career? And that's really all I had. That's really all I had. And then the story, if I can take a second, it's just like writing an investigative story for television. I start with a question, with a proposition, with a prediction or a curiosity. What if this happened? What if that happened? I wonder if this works the way it's supposed to work. What would happen if this happened? I wonder if the system is working properly. And I go out and I track down clues and I follow leads and I do interviews, and I'm out in search of the story. And every day something happens, and every day something happens that's new and different and unpredictable, and that's great. And that's exactly like writing. That's exactly like writing a novel. And I don't know what's going to happen in my news stories. If I knew, they wouldn't be news, right? If I could know the ending or know the answer, um, they wouldn't be new. And that's what I'm doing as I'm writing a novel. I'm just seeing what happens next, what happens in a world that feels realistic, that isn't the real world. It's a fictional world, but it feels realistic, and things work the way they do, and passions happen, and conflicts happen, and terrifying things happen, and desire happens, and people want something, and somebody else wants something else. And when those two things conflict, then we have suspense and we have a page turning thriller. And that's what I do. So that's what gets me to the computer every day. I think I can't wait to find out what happens next. And the only way I can find that out is by writing the next part of the book.
So, is there a particular story? Carol Griffin asks, and actually, Louise H. has also submitted a similar question. Is there a story about the genesis of your latest book? And how biographical is that to your own experiences?
Okay, well, it's a little bit autobiographical, and that turns out to be one of the unexpected joys of this book. I'll tell you, I can tell you the moment that this book came to mind, absolutely perfectly. I was at a bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. Some of you may know it, the Poison Pen Bookstore, which is sort of a haven for mystery readers and crime fiction readers. And I was signing books, as we always do. And I wrote in somebody's novel, "So wonderful to see you in Scottsdale." And I put the date and I signed my name. And then I thought, and as I handed the reader the book, I thought, well, I've just given her a perfect alibi. She could prove where she was by this book. She could say, look, see, Hank Phillippi Ryan was here and I was here and it was in Scottsdale and it was on this date. And I just sort of tossed that off initially and thought, oh, that's kind of funny. And then I started thinking, because I'm a reporter and I'm a crime fiction author, so my mind goes to what is the worst possible thing that could ever happen, and what would be worse than that, and what would be scarier than that. So that's how my crime fiction writer brain works. So then I thought about the other things that authors all write in novels, and I know you all have these in your home, like "Thank you for a wonderful evening." So let's say I write "Thank you for a wonderful evening" in my book and I hand it to you. And then someday you could say to someone, you know what she meant by that, and make up some story about what I meant by "Thank you for a wonderful evening," or "Thank you for everything." And you could say, oh, yeah, let me tell you more about what she meant. And I started realizing how every single thing we do on book tour is actually terrifying. I go on book tour I'm in a different city every day, in a different hotel every day, in a different bookstore every day, in a different library every day. I have no idea where I am half the time. I'm in a complete state of starvation and disequilibrium and fear and total joy at every moment. And at every moment, I'm surrounded by strangers. I'm surrounded by people who know more about me than I know about them. You came here tonight, you all, because you saw me on social media, you saw the GBH promotion, you know where I am, and I love that. I love that you know where I am. All authors love that you know where we are. On the other hand, you know where we are. If I'm in the Des Moines library, you know where the front door is, and I'm going to go in there. And so I started thinking, I sort of actually weaponized every single thing that could go wrong on book tour and took this fabulous, glamorous book tour that my main character, Tessa Calloway, is sent on. And I just turned it into a nightmare. I turned a gorgeous nationwide book tour into a deadly, dangerous cross country cat and mouse chase with the author running for her life. And that is all this could be yours. And so, you know the story. It started out with one autograph on a book. And from that, that is all I had. From that, I took Tessa and readers on this journey of what it's really like to be on book tour. Every single scene in this book takes place in an airport or an airplane or an Uber or a hotel or a library or a bookstore, just like real book tour. And at every single moment, something could go wrong. And at every single moment, something does.
That's amazing because it is that knife edge of the excitement and glamour and the danger, and you painted the picture perfectly. Now, Hank, I know you often hear from writers who want to know about your process. So we're going to dive a little bit into that. And M. Nasca, who is listening, says, can you share your debut journey when you were starting as a book author, from finding an agent to collaborating to manuscript submission, publishing contract? Tell us how it worked.
That's funny. And let me go back, because you're speaking of authors and writers. I have author friends who have read All This Could Be Yours, and they have said to me they're glad they read it when they came home from book tour, because if they had read it on the road, it would have creeped them out too much. And so I think that's a great compliment. Thank you. That's marvelous. Um, because that's my goal. Let me say very quickly, that's my goal in writing a novel. I want you to miss your stop on the T, because you just can't put the book down. A fast-paced, page-turning psychological thriller that has no graphic sex, no graphic violence, no inappropriate language, just gaslighting and manipulation and deception and a whole lot of murder, a little bit of murder. So anyway, back to the question about the beginnings. um, I have to tell you that when I started writing, I I had no idea what I was doing in any way. I will confess to you that not only did I not know how to write a novel, I had no idea how the world worked, how the publishing world worked in any way. I just sat down at my desk and wrote a book that I absolutely loved. I will tell you that at the end of the first draft, it was 723 pages long. So I had to cut 400 pages. And that was just the beginning of the process of this. I learned that you need to find an agent to sell a book to a major publisher. It took me a while to find an agent. It was back in the day when you had to send in your manuscript on paper. So, and you would send a stamped, self-addressed envelope. And so every day I would get home and see my handwriting in the mailbox and know that it was yet another rejection letter. And I got several rejection letters. And then suddenly everybody started saying yes. I have no idea what happened. But it just hit the nerve of someone and they decided yes, yes, yes. My agent then found a publisher pretty quickly. That was the first book. I learned to work with an editor to craft the best possible book that I could. Again, it's so fascinating and so illustrative that I had worked for years as a reporter before that, telling stories with a beginning, middle, and an end, with a character who you cared about and a problem that an important problem, a high stakes problem that needed to be solved, where the good guys win and the bad guys get what's coming to them. And in the end, you get some justice and you change the world a little bit. So writing, in fiction, I just had to make stuff up, but I already knew how to tell a story. And I think my new agent at that time, and I think my publisher at that time understood that even though I was a novice at fiction, that I did know how to tell a story. My first book, as I said, my first book, Crime Time, came out in 2007. Is that when it was? And won the Agatha for Best First Mystery. As I said so delightedly, that's the teapot behind me on the shelf is what an Agatha award looks like. They're teapots because they're for mysteries, right? And I've been writing a book a year, as you said, Liz. I've been writing a book a year ever since. Every writer's journey is different. Every writer's journey has terrific highs and incredible lows. And there is not a day that goes by, even now, maybe especially now, as I'm working on my books where I don't think, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how I wrote those other books. I'll never be able to do it again. This is a terrible idea. Whose idea was this? I know help. I don't know. And then I think, just calm down. You've done it before. You can do it again. Just persevere. So I love the process. I embrace the process. I love being an author. I love being on book tour. It's fantastic. My book is in no means a complaint about it, but it's a gorgeous, complicated, high stakes profession where at every moment something could go wrong and at every moment something could go fabulously right. I just think if I have one good idea a day, isn't that's enough? That would be great. So telling my story about how I got published is interesting and it's fascinating to me. It may not necessarily connect with anybody else's writing process, but what does connect, what does matter for all of us is to be brave, is to be confident, is to not be distressed or discouraged because you never know what wonderful thing is around the next corner. My husband and I don't celebrate, let me say this, my husband and I don't celebrate the anniversary of the day we met. We celebrate the anniversary of the day before we met. And we call that You Never Know Day because you never know what wonderful thing is around the next corner. And in life, my whole life has been like that. And in writing fiction, for any of you who are writing, every day of writing fiction is like that. You never know what wonderful thing is around the next corner.
What a delicious idea. I love that idea that you and your husband celebrate that. That really, really is fabulous. It's so wonderful. Another question about how your investigative career informs your writing, your other writing. How, Alex Z asks, how do you fictionalize professional contacts and acquaintances in your writing? And what are the advantages and hazards of using people you know as a basis for fictional characters, especially antagonists?
Yes, I can tell you that nobody in my book is based on anyone at all. They are it's hard to believe. I know it is, but these are wholly fictional characters. Okay, Alex, the only person in my books who's sort of based on someone else is there. Charlotte, in my first book, the main character is a Boston reporter named Charlotte McNally, and her mother plays a big role in the book. And certainly Charlotte McNally's mother is based on my mother, something that really made my mother unhappy from time to time, even though I tried to tell her she was a fictional character. But she wouldn't, and she was so right. Just ask her. But in my 43 years as a television reporter, I've wired myself with hidden cameras and confronted corrupt politicians and chased down criminals and gone undercover and in disguise. We've sent people to prison and gotten people out of prison. I've gotten millions of dollars in refunds and restitution for victims. I've gotten people's homes out of foreclosure. It's that those life experiences, and I've been a writer for now 20 years. So those real life experiences have to imbue the books. It would be silly if I didn't. If I, I know what people look like when they lie. I've been underground at the airport and behind the scenes in the state house and courthouses. I've been places where people, I've been with SWAT teams and tear gas and murder scenes and you know all those kinds of things. I've covered true crime for 43 years, and now I write crime fiction. So I'm wholly qualified to do that now. Finally, for once in my life, imagine that. So, but my television stories, my crime fiction stories are not my television stories fictionalized in any way. I take a little bit from here, maybe a little bit from here, and a little bit from here, and a lot from here, and it's sort of like a Rubik's cube, and it comes out wholly fictional. And so even though my books take place in Boston, and you'll recognize, that the water that condenses out of the air conditioner in a number 9 park by the State House restaurant, and how it drips on pedestrians, and how you can never find your way anywhere in Boston, and what happens in Boston with driving when it snows, and what a coffee regular at Dunkin's is. I mean, yeah, those are our common shared experiences. And our common shared Boston experiences, Massachusetts experiences, New England experiences are infused in the books. But the stories, although they feel real, and I love that you think they're based on real people because they aren't, it just means that the fictional characters seem right to you, seem like how people really behave. And that motivation, that perseverance, that persistence, that desire, that passion, that's what I'm trying to bring out in the novels. That fast paced, page turning, surprising, propulsive, total immersion story. And if the characters feel and the situations feel as if they're based on real stories, that's great to me because that means I have done my job to make the movie in your mind start scrolling. And that's totally what I'm going for.
Lorraine Hutchinson asks, besides Agatha Christie, Nancy Drew, who are your favorite mystery writers and have they influenced your writing career?
Yes, that's a great question. I love to talk about good books. You can see them all behind me, but what you don't see out of camera range is all the piles of books that are just stacked on the floor and behind the chairs. Harlan Coben said to write the kind of books you love to read. And I really believe that. And I read a lot of crime fiction, of psychological fiction and suspense novels and crime fiction, those kinds of things. I love Lisa Jewell. She is a British author who writes psychological fiction novels of suspense. They're smart and fast paced and surprising and gorgeously written. If I list them, it's so funny, I'll list Lisa Scottolini, Lisa Jewell, Lisa Unger, and Lisa Gardner. Lisa, and Hank. And if those names leap out at you as someone that you love, those are the kinds of books I write as well. Fast paced books about people who you care about. Someone was asking about how my investigative career and investigative writing affected my writing, and I think that all of those authors, Lisa, and me, have stories about people you care about. You are invested in the character, you relate to the character, and all this could be yours. Tessa Calloway is a person just like many of us. She's a smart woman, a mom, a wife who wants to follow her dream and have a career and just live her one life the best way she can. And who of us hasn't felt like that? I mean, on page one of the novel, and this is no spoiler, on page one, Tessa says she quits her career in the corporate world. She walks out. She says, "I'm tired of being ignored. I'm tired of being invisible." And she just walks off the job to follow her dream and write a novel. And as the novel begins, Tessa's dream apparently has come true. But like Lisa, and Lisa, my book is a careful what you wish for thriller. One of those things that when you get everything you always thought you wanted, what could go wrong? And what can go wrong is that you have a secret. So I really embrace those authors who don't use graphic violence in their novels, but whose stories are propulsive and immersive. I love Tess Gerritsen is quite astonishing. Janice Hallett, another British author who is completely ingenious. Today I interviewed an author called Susie Dent, who wrote a new book about a group of people who are essentially creating the Oxford English Dictionary in Oxford called Guilty by Definition. And it just shows you how those really brilliantly smart stories can really carry you along. Oh, you know what? Who I left out? Anthony Horowitz, whose Magpie Murders are on GBH, and I absolutely love them. And the books, the series of Magpie Murder books, are absolutely fantastic. They're smart and clever and witty and wise and absolutely unputdownable.
These all sound like marvelous, so many great authors, but have you read a book recently that made you jealous? That made you say, "Oh, I wish I had done that." You know, it's one thing to admire, but have you ever
Yeah,
been
you
brought
know
to that
what,
point?
Liz? Daily. I mean, daily. I mean, it's interesting how one of the secrets of being an author is you read books differently. It's very rare to come across a book like, that you can read a book and you think, "Oh, how did this one get published? I don't know." Or you can read a book and think, "Well, this is okay, but I wouldn't have done that, or I might have changed the ending, or oh, they've used the word grotesque 3 times. That seems odd. They need an editor." But then there are the ones where you just forget to edit, you just forget to critique, and the walls fall away and the world goes away, and you are just immersed in that fabulous book. I remember that happening to me with The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jewell, and I just thought, actually, I can tell you, I thought, I'm just giving up now because this is really good, and I'm not that good. And that's the kind of book that absolutely blows me away. And we search for that, right? We search for that marvelous book in any genre that can really, I mean, I always say it's always safe inside a book. It's always safe inside a book where we're solving somebody else's problems and undertaking somebody else's difficulties. And in the end, we get justice and we get to change the world a little bit. And you close that book, and that's what I'm going for. And all this could be yours completely is you close the book and you think, yeah, that's exactly what should have happened. I never saw that coming, but that's exactly what should have happened. So I love that part of my life now, part of my career now, is getting to read great books and talk to the authors of all the lucky. I'm the luckiest person in the world. I really do have to say. I feel that way a lot of the time. I love my career as a reporter. But let me say this, and I have followed my other dream to be a crime fiction author, and to immerse myself in that is just a true joy.
Now, another question about structure and your writing process. Mark Tatum asks, so you don't plan out your story beginning, middle, end? How about the pacing of the story?
No, Mark, here's the thing. I have no idea what's going to happen until I write the next sentence or the next paragraph or the next page or the next scene. I just don't know. I just have these characters who I care about, all of whom want something, and I just see what happens. Now, at some point, I understand the structure of a story. I know that a story has a beginning, middle, and an end, as you say. I know how long it sort of has to be. I know the rhythm and the metabolism of a story. I know that, just like in television, when I don't want you to click, click, click and turn the channel when my stories are on, I want you not to be able to put my books down. You know, when the pilot says we're preparing our descent, I want you to think, no, 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 I just want to read one more chapter. And that is top of mind to me. What is top of mind for me is to entertain you, is to keep you absolutely engrossed in my book. So yes, I think about that. I think about remember that I told you my first novel was 723 pages long. Okay, that'll never happen again because I have learned to take out everything that isn't the book. All the tangents, all the digressions, all the divergences, all the times that I'm trying to show off as a writer or trying to be funny or, you know, putting the purple bruised clouds of dawn, you know, like overwritten descriptions, all that's going to go. And it has gotten more difficult to write my novels as I write more because I know more about how to do it. And I know more about what makes a book really good and what makes it sort of randomly good and what makes it bad. And so I challenge myself every day. I raise the bar on myself every day to write the best book that I possibly can to be the best me that I am for now. I mean, so my previous book, you know, book 15, that was the best I could possibly have done from the me that lived to write One Wrong Word, which just made the USA Today bestseller list as well. But then the me that wrote All This Could Be Yours, that's a different me. That's a me who knows more. That's a me with more experience. And the other thing about writing a book with no, we call, you know, there are two kinds of novelists, plotters and pantsers. A plotter who outlines everything, they know the plot, and pantsers who write by the seat of their pants. And that's what I am. I write by the seat of my pants. And I'm not worried about that because even though it seems like a high wire act, and it is, to type the letters chapter one and then think, okay, 99,000 words to go, and I don't know what any of them are. I don't fear that because I don't know the endings of my television stories and I don't know the endings of my novels, and that's okay because in life we don't know what happens next. We have to wait and see. So my editor has said, I will confess to you, my editor has said, can't you just send me an outline? And I say, right. And I say, no, because how do I know what happens until it happens? And it doesn't happen until I write it. Knowing that, though, that when I write the first draft, then I think, okay, I've been in search of the story. I've now found the story. I now know what happens. Then I go back to the beginning and I can mold it to be the story that it was meant to be. So I'm first just finding out what the story is. Then I go back and make it what I hoped to write. I can craft and edit and tweak and polish. And that's the ball game, that editing process. Everybody starts out with a really terrible first draft. I do at least. I mean, if anybody saw my first draft, you just think, how did she ever get published? This is awful. I embrace the awfulness. I know it's awful. There are days that I type and I think, this is the worst thing anybody's ever written. This is bad. And then I think, yes, it is, sister. Just write another bad sentence and another bad sentence because you can fix it later. So with the knowledge that it's not like a test that I'm going to hand in at the end of the day, I have this, you know, series of months to write a book, and I can tweak and polish and change and edit and have the jewel at the end that you never would have predicted from that rough thing that started the first draft.
And so you know this world of mystery and thrillers so well, and all these authors that maybe help inform your world and your development as a mystery writer. But there's a question from a guest, KD, asks, do you read books other than thriller mysteries?
Besides how to write a thriller. I'm sure, of course. I one of the things that happens though in my life at least is that I have several shows, the Back Room and First Chapter Fun and Mighty Blaze Crime Time, where I interview authors, and I do that a couple of times a week. I also interview a lot of authors for various bookstores in person and online. So I have a lot of book homework, frankly, where I have to read a novel, get to read a novel to interview the author. And so the time that I have for reading a book, and luckily, most of those books, many of those books, almost all of those books are books I would have read anyway because they're books that I love. So I have much less time to just sort of read something else that might be fabulous, because there's just only so much time in the day, and part of that time has to be used for writing my own book. So right now I'm kind of total immersion thriller, I have to say. Although, I was a Shakespeare major in college and an English major and English literature, and I've always loved reading in a great vast realm of novels and nonfiction. So I'm open to everything, but right now in my life, I'm pretty much focused on crime fiction.
Okay, now I want to bring it back to the book that we have tonight, All This Could Be Yours, and ask you about social media, which is really a character in the book. Is that part of your life as well? I know you must be very active because you're quite skilled at moving around social media, but was there a decision that you made that this had to be a character very present in this book?
Well, because the book is about Tessa Calloway, who lives in Rockport, Massachusetts, and follows her dream to be a writer. And her first novel, her debut novel, is a surprise blockbuster success. And she is sent on this nationwide book tour to go to libraries and go to bookstores to talk to people about the book. And her whole goal, she realizes she's sort of like a traveling salesman, a traveling salesperson who's out on the road pushing her wares. I have to tell you that it's really funny to be an author on book tour, as I am now, talking about a book called All This Could Be Yours, which is about an author on book tour talking about a book called All This Could Be Yours. So I have to say it's pretty meta and pretty funny. But social media, Tessa learns via her publicist and via her life, social media is how discoverability works. If readers don't know that an author exists, if readers don't know that a book exists, then that book is just going to sit there like a lump and nobody will read it and nobody will find it and no one will discover it. And one of the things that's such a power in our world today is social media, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or websites or whatever it is. We are all so linked into that. And Tessa is linked into that as well. She started on a website on an Instagram page that is hashtag moms with dreams. Tessa's pals are moms with dreams, women just like her who want to make their one life be fulfilled. And that's what Tessa is doing. So she quits live on Instagram. She walks out of her job on page one live on Instagram and says, "Are you with me?" And her social media fans say yes, we're with you. So she is not alone on this fabulous book tour, and that is part of the problem. Exactly as you say. People know where she is. People love Tessa. They want her autograph. They want to be her friend. They want to be with her. They want to know everything about her husband and everything about her children and everything about her life. And she has to balance how much she's going to allow her personal life to be paraded all over social media. I mean, once I was in an airport and I posted, "Here I am at gate D42 in the whatever it was airport" on Instagram. And I got a text from my publicist saying, "What are you doing saying where you are?" And I didn't realize at the time how vulnerable we all are as authors. You all know that wild ducks come to our backyard every year because I put that on Facebook. You all know that I have a real problem making Thanksgiving gravy. I just can't make gravy. I'm sorry, but I can't. And you all know that about me because I put that on social media. It's such a part of our lives. And Tessa realizes that juggle, that vulnerability, that availability is deadly and lethal and dangerous because people know where she is. And there's sort of a concept called being a sort of parasocial behavior that Tessa runs into, where because of the proximity of a person, of all of us authors, of all of us people on social media, there are people who think they are Tessa's friend because she wrote a book they love. That means that Tessa understands them, and if she understands them, that must mean she likes them, and that must mean they're her friends. I mean, as Tessa says in the book, there's a reason they're called fans because it comes from the word fanatic. And when fans go over that line, that can be dangerous because authors will then disappoint them. They're not your friend. And when you disappoint someone who's unpleasant to begin with, that can cause some problems. I mean, and I know, we know authors who travel with bodyguards. That's not fiction. That's absolutely true. So as Tessa is a massively famous author, she's recognized in airports. People have her book, and they see her picture on the back cover, and they're sitting by her on an airplane. Is that good or bad? Like, she has her name on her luggage tag, and she realizes, why am I doing that? People know this is my suitcase. So at every turn, she's vulnerable. And at every turn, her publicist and her publisher are saying, make sure you post on social media, make sure you have a lot of followers. So, how is she supposed to handle that? And finally, about that, her family is home. Her husband and her kids are home. And she is having to be a mom and a wife via Zoom and via FaceTime. And how can she be successful at that? How can she have the career that she loves and be a wife and a mom successfully, especially when she begins to see that not only is someone out to ruin her career, but someone is out to destroy the family she left back home? And why isn't her husband showing her on social media? Why is he curating the video of his Zooms? Why is he curating the video of his FaceTimes? Why isn't he showing her the kids? Why isn't he showing her their new kitchen? Why isn't he showing her their house? Why isn't he showing her the neighbors that are coming over and bringing food and bringing who knows what
Yes,
else?
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you really touched on those things that really sort of prick the brain of a mom, including, this is not a spoiler, but the haircut that the daughter gets when she's not there to approve. It's all beautifully done. I unfortunately, I think we do have to move on and wrap things up. We could keep going for a long time. But before we wrap up, we like to end beyond the page with one final question, Hank. We ask this of every guest. If you were to share the top 3 books that made you, what would they be? And they don't have to, you have sort of hinted at authors. They don't have to be literary masterpieces. They could be, guilty pleasures, childhood favorites, more than welcome. What are those top 3, if you can, books that shaped you, inspired you, or just stuck with you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember when I was growing up, there was a book called Diamond in the Window by Jane Langton. She was a local author in Massachusetts. I grew up in Indiana. But Diamond in the Window took place in Concord, Massachusetts, and it was about 4 smart kids who live in a very special house. And they realize that the house has a secret. A diamond in the window is what it's called, an old Victorian house. And it's a story about smart kids on an adventure, on a journey, who have to use, their wit and their skill and their intelligence and their imagination to solve a high stakes problem. And I love that they all work together. I love that, I guess I was about 10. I love that they worked together and they were smart, and it was cool to be smart, and it was cool to solve puzzles, and it was cool. I mean, it's such a wonderful novel, The Diamond in the Window by Jane Langton. I mentioned Murder on the Orient Express, and that was completely foundational for me. But the other Agatha Christie that was foundational for me is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And I will not talk any more about that except to say that that is a high wire act. That is a tour de force of sleight of hand and mystery storytelling. And when you read that book, you'll think, how did she ever do that? And that taught me sort of the magic of writing mysteries, of how the author can distract the reader by saying, look over here, look at this shiny thing over here, when you should really be looking over here. It's fair, it's smart, and it's absolutely surprising. And I hold The Murder of Roger Ackroyd up as one of those novels that you aspire to. Can I be as cool as that? It would be difficult, but I'm going for it every day. And I guess the third one, now that I'm thinking about it, completely different book, is Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton. I'm a massive Edith Wharton fan. And Custom of the Country was life changing for me because And it's interesting in light of the conversation, Liz, that we've been having tonight. It's interesting to me because Custom of the Country is about a young woman who wants to do something that she's not supposed to do. You know, she wonders why women in her era can't be on their own, can't have powerful jobs, can't be in charge, can't be confident, can't take control of things, why they always have to be subservient. And it was really before her time, Edith Wharton, the setting and the dialogue and the social dimensions and the lessons in Custom of the Country, the sarcasm and the irony and the cynicism, and the observation of our world and the world we live in and our places in it. And I think about that book all the time as well. That really, I'm all of those three made me the author I am today, and I embrace that completely.
Thank you so much. And just like that, we are at the end of another great Beyond the Page. Thank you so much, Hank Phillippi Ryan, for such a thoughtful and absolutely inspiring conversation. And thanks to all of you for being here with us. Thank you so much and have a great night.
Good night, everyone.